Test.
Is it only 5? I thought it was supposed to be 10. It's 10 years probation, early term after 5 is what. Early termination after half, which is 5. Right. Yeah. All right, you guys, mic's working? Mic check. All right, let's call the order. This is City of Port Richey Community Redevelopment Agency Board meeting, Tuesday, March 9th, 2021. At this time, let's stand and say the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call, please.
Chairman Scott Tremblay.
Here.
Member William Dittmer.
Here.
Member Jenny Sorrell.
Here.
Member Todd McClary.
Here.
Member Tom Kinsella.
Here.
City Attorney James Matthew.
Here.
City Manager John Duke.
Here.
This time looking for a motion to approve board minutes.
Motion to approve. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We're going to open it up for comments from the general public. Nobody signed up. I do see a handful of people from the general public. If I show of hands, anyone's welcome to speak. It'll be 3 minutes. Seeing no hands, we're going to close comments from the general public. We'll open with comments from City Manager, Mr. Dude, if there are any.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, the only thing to add, I did receive the final feasibility report from AIRS that came in Thursday. It's too late to get it on the agenda for today. I would welcome your input as to how you would like for me to handle that, if you'd like to have a special meeting, or if you want to wait for 2 weeks to have another CRA board meeting, we can do that. But I've also spoken with AIRS, and they are prepared to come present their report. If you'd like to have a CRA board meeting or a stakeholders meeting, we can do that either way. But stand for your guidance as to how you'd like for that to be handled. But it is received by the city.
Okay, comment on that as well?
Yep.
What I'd like to see, obviously, would be on the next agenda for us to review, but also I'd like to go ahead and schedule the workshop with the Cody River Landing business owners, now that we have that, and make sure AIRS is available to review that with the business owners.
Would that be an open workshop to citizens as well, too? Or?
It has been, yeah,
Okay.
for the first 2 we did it that way.
Okay.
So I was making some notes. So,
And one more thing, we also want to put on that discussion of the Duke Energy temporary lighting.
I'll include that.
Yep, thank you.
It's your pleasure for a date and time?
Whichever available, yep,
Okay.
whatever works for them.
Okay. I can reach out to the stakeholders and see if there's a consensus for a date early next week that works for them.
Do we want to give staff time to review before we review it with them?
Sure.
Definitely would like to review.
Excuse me?
I would like for us to take.
Yeah, that's what I'm
a
saying,
look
so
at it
you
first,
guys see it first, and, yeah.
yes, please.
I will get that out to you this evening.
while the floor is still Mr. Dutz, I was going to ask him kind of how the audit was going for the CRA too.
We are in regular, shall we say, daily communication with the auditor. Mr. Matthew and I have worked, and mostly Mr. Matthew has worked on answers to questions about questions. And so we are still getting questions, everything from what happened 20 years ago to change the edits on the website. So Valerie's been working diligently to get information up on the website the way the auditor wants it. So he continues to ask questions. We continue to answer them with a lot of help from Mr. Matthew and others. But we've got another set of questions completed today. We'll get those back to Mr. Herman tomorrow. So the process continues, but almost daily communication with Mr. Herman.
Very well. Any further follow-up questions about that?
Is there an end in sight?
Last I spoke with Mr. Herman about what he envisioned the deadline to be. Apparently he has to report out to the audit committee within 2 months. And so he's not willing to give me a solid deadline, but it seems reasonable that by the time the audit committee's ready for their report, he's going to have to be wrapped up. So I know that's a fuzzy end date, but the last time he did give me a date, he said 6 to 8 weeks, and that was probably 2 weeks ago. So,
Very well. Let's move on to comments from the board at this time. And we'll start with Vice Mayor William Dittmer, if any.
One of the items, since we do have Mr. Biles here with us this evening, I'd like to get with you on an early discussion about participation in Nix Park boat ramp work, and I know you were on top of that. One of the things I wanted to follow up is I think since we've changed city managers, I think Mr. Sossman sent out the engineering that we had at that point to you. I'm not sure if that actually happened or what we had transmitted to you, but I want to stay on top of that to make sure we move forward with that.
Would you like us to
work
send
in
you a
Nix
new
Park.
copy of that?
Well,
Yeah.
welcome, Dan.
Yeah, thank you. Dan Biles, Pasco County Administrator. I also have a couple, Bob Gore and Dan Rizzolo from the Budget Director office with me as well today. So I think he did send me the engineering. And so really and we had some conversations about some assistance with that.
Correct. I just
So-
didn't want to fall into the abyss at that point.
Yeah, I think probably what I need is really what is the city looking to the county for us to support on that. And so
Well-
we had some conversations, but I think from our perspective, or the CRA, whichever body I'm talking to, what are you looking for the county to support so that I can go run the traps on our end? Because there are a couple different funding sources we could work on.
I
for
was
that.
just going to say,
So-
funding was a big source because
Right.
it came in substantially more than we had
Right.
anticipated,
Right.
which it always does.
Right.
Secondly, we thought, well, possibly using the county as a resource for some of the things that can be done there to help us out as well. So
Right.
it could be a little bit of both.
Yeah, and so I think, maybe we ought to sit down again.
I think that was my
Come
point. I think we
us
need to sit down
maybe
and-
a proposal,
Right.
and then we can work through it on our side. But, probably a comprehensive concrete proposal that I can take and go back and evaluate and say, okay, maybe I can't come up with X, but maybe we can get Y, right? And we can work
Correct,
on
as long
those
as we're
things.
moving
So, yeah.
forward. I just want to make sure that was happening.
Yeah.
Because this will fall under the CRA to do Nix Park as well, so.
Right, and when we are working, waterfront projects, right? And one
Correct.
of the goals of the board is to increase waterfront access. So
Correct.
we are working with Newport Richey on their project that they have going on. We have ours going on down at Anclote, where we're trying to work to redefine that park as well. Again, it's all about adding capacity for people to get to the water.
Functionality, all those
Right.
things, right? Because
Yeah.
I had talked,
So,
I had been dealing with Mr. Wells at the time.
Yeah,
And obviously, he's not there anymore, but.
right.
Okay,
Yeah,
great. I just want to make sure you got it. I want to make sure we get it,
Right.
communication together, and that we move forward on
Right.
that, working with you
Yeah, and I'd
guys.
bring Keith Wiley, our Parks Director, in, because that's really falls under his bailiwick.
Perfect, great.
Right, so,
Thank you,
yep,
Dan.
No problem. That's an easy one.
Thanks.
For now.
That's all I have, Mayor.
Okay. I don't have anything on.
I have nothing.
At this time, we're going to move on to board business. There's 2 items. The first item I want to get Mr. Biles moving is the discussion from the Pasco County Board meeting, Commissioners meeting, and that's the one that I attended. Just as a refresher, it's a meeting where I attended County Commissioner meeting. There were some questions about the direction of our CRA that were fairly broad. I put together a little bit of a presentation in terms of where we were moving, in terms of the waterfront overlay district, brought a map and some of the different ideas that we're looking to do in terms of funding that with CRA in large part to provide a better and a safer environment for folks that are down in the waterfront area, which would include lighting, roadways, multi-use path, which would be a sidewalk for pedestrian traffic, so on and so forth. So that's still ongoing. It sounds like we now have a feasibility study complete for mayors, so that'll certainly help. But while I was there were some collateral issues that came up. And Mr. Biles, if you will, I wanted to make sure I framed some of the issues correctly so that we stay on point with our discussion. And I had kind of 3 kind of main issues from different commissioners, if you will. I know that Commissioner Moore was concerned about the entire city of Port Richey being within a CRA boundary or a blighted area, if you will. And his suggestion is that some of it should be redrawn, and specifically just a little area in Harbor Point where it's a gated community and we have higher end houses out there. And so his suggestion is that we discuss that to see whether or not we would take Harbor Point out of the CRA. Is that kind of an accurate, one of the accurate issues to talk about there?
Yes, sir. I think that's correct, and where the CRA and ultimately the governing body draws a line, I think the board would take that under advisement as to whether we thought that was the right place to do it, or they thought that was the right place to do it. I think ultimately, as you heard, there were 3 issues. That kind of the finances and the audit, I kind of wrap it into one, if you will. But I think the easier low-hanging fruit, if you will, is to really evaluate the boundaries, and are there areas inside the CRA that really meet the definition of slum and blight, which is really the intent of a CRA. And I think the board's position is you do have areas inside your CRA that don't meet that definition, and it's pretty self-evident when you drive around some areas, especially your waterfront, that don't meet that definition of slum and blight. And so I think from their perspective, that's an easy edit, if you will, that shows the intent to really come into compliance with the statute. So
Okay.
I think that's the first one.
And if I can outline kind of the other 2 that I had, I know that Commissioner Mariano had a concern with the way that the CRA was funded this past fiscal year, and that was one of the things that he mentioned, so I wanted to at least touch on that for discussion as a topic.
And I think, that while that was a specific issue, I think there's some probably more broader discussions with regard to CRA financing, if you will, and the financial situation behind the CRA. And so I think globally, the board is kind of waiting, just like as you mentioned, the state of the audit, because that may identify specific areas that need to be corrected. And in general, I think sometimes hard to speak for the board's perspective, but in general, I think the board thinks solving your where we don't believe you necessarily comply with the financial piece and the financial plans as outlined in the CRA, that's not necessarily something you're going to solve in the month of March, if you will. That's a long-term plan. So you get the audit back, you build a plan for how you're going to come into compliance, and as long as it's reasonable and makes sense, I think the board is going to be okay with that.
And then that kind of went hand in hand with, I think it was Commissioner Starkey suggested that she was concerned about how the CRA was being spent, whether or not it was either blighted areas and or for operational things such as salaries, and I think she had touched on that.
Yeah,
And that kind of went hand in hand with what Commissioner Mariano was talking about too. They both kind of touched on both topics, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And I think it goes to the broader issue of are the finances set up in compliance with the CRA Act, and are we following that? And I think some of that, the audit will identify some areas that you may need to work on, and I think from the board's perspective, let's see what that is. We have what we believe are the requirements of the CRA, and where we believe the the CRA may fall short today, your CRA may fall short today. And let's just work towards a plan for bringing the entire thing into compliance over a period of time. That's not something you're gonna do in a quarter or even one fiscal year. So I think I kind of wrap them into two. You kind of split two up into, one into two, so.
But you have those two main issues.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think from the board's perspective, one is a really relatively easy target, if you will, from the governing body and the CRA board. Are there areas inside the CRA that don't meet the definition of slum and blight? And if there are, then you probably need to take those out of the CRA. That's relatively easy. Newport Richey went through that same thing about a year ago, and within a period, I want to say probably less than 6 months, they identified some areas and they redrew their boundary. The governing body has the authority under the Florida state statute to redraw your boundary. So I think those are the two main issues from the board's perspective. You have a beautiful waterfront. You have a lot of ways that really could be leveraged for economic growth and development on your waterfront and in and around that. And so the board wants to be a participant in that. But we also want to make sure we're doing things and getting the CRA in the right manner and functioning correctly.
All right, excellent. Did anyone have any questions for Mr. Bobs? This is why he's standing up there at this point before we dive into any of the issues. No.
Not yet.
No,
Okay.
not yet. I'm sure we'll get
The
into
only
it.
question I have is the original boundaries, they were not submitted by us, were they? They were outlined by the state at the time?
I don't know the history there. The statute gives the governing body the ability to redraw the boundaries.
Okay.
So when you look at Florida state statute, it's pretty clear. The CRA would make a recommendation to the
My
governing
point
body.
was, I don't believe we originally put that in.
I think we did by application.
I think we
and-
put it in by application, but then it was approved
Okay.
and said, yes, we agree that
The whole thing.
the whole thing
Okay.
is a
Right.
blighted community.
Yeah,
All right.
I'll say in
So you're just looking to sharpen the boundaries and.
right. I think the key is, when you drive through areas of your city, are there areas that don't really meet the definition of slum and blight? And I think
I think
it's
Harbor
pretty
Point fits
self-evident
that.
that there are areas that really don't meet the definition of slum and blight, and they probably should be pulled out.
Okay.
And really, there's Dade City and Zephyr Hills both have CRAs, and they're reasonably in compliance with the statute with respect to slum and blight, and the boundaries are both pretty confined inside the city limits, and Newport Richey just adjusted theirs. And we think that was a good first step. May not be
Okay.
everywhere it needs to be, but we expect these things don't get solved overnight.
I think we can find some common ground
So-
on those boundaries.
Because there's a couple theoretical questions. One of them is whether or not you can have a non-blighted area within CRA boundaries, and I couldn't find any governing authority on that. And the reason I was looking is because the purpose of CRA way back from when was to cure some of the blight. And as you cure blight, obviously those cured blighted areas are still within the boundaries.
Right.
So, but I couldn't find any authority that suggested that a city should take that now that's non-blighted area out of those boundaries just because it's been remedied or fixed. So I was trying to find some guidance, and I really couldn't find any where that's really been addressed. So that was one of the issues that I was going to talk to the board about, because those are all kind of interesting issues that I couldn't find where any other cities had run across that issue before. And I'm sure it happens quite a bit where there's blighted areas that become cured.
Bob's worked some down in South Florida, so
And I was thinking of
Right.
Ybor City, for example.
Right.
Yeah, I know that they used CRA money at some point to cure some of that blighted area around 7th Avenue, and they have Ybor Central and all that. That having been said, that specific area now I would suggest is probably non-blighted or should be
Right.
considered non-blighted,
Right.
but I wouldn't necessarily believe that they would have pulled all that out of the CRA boundaries either. So, I didn't know.
yeah, I think if you go back to the intent is the CRA eventually works itself out of a job, right?
Right.
I mean, the
Theoretically.
ultimate goal theoretically is to get rid of all the slum and blight, and
Correct.
eventually it would work itself out of a job, and then you would get back to a city with no slum and blight. no CRA.
Conceivably, though, there'd be new areas that are brought into the fold, too. I mean,
Yeah.
for us, the whole city is right now considered that. In Tampa areas, there are areas that are coming out of blight, and there
Right.
are areas that are going into blight in some degree. So it's almost a moving target
Yeah, it
to a
would
degree.
evolve over time.
Correct.
Yeah. So.
Okay. I have no more questions.
I don't either. I wanted to open the discussion because I think that issue that Commissioner Moore brought up about the lines should be the focus of our discussion to start, if you guys are okay with that.
I mean, we can start there, but it sounded like the financial aspect really isn't even up for discussion tonight because we're waiting for so many things. We're waiting for the results of the audit. We're waiting, and that's more of a long-term goal, I think, is what the intent is.
Yeah, yes.
There's nothing we could even speak or even talk to tonight because we really don't know what we have to fix, if anything we have to fix. The audit may come back and says, well, other than tweaking your website and doing XYZ, you are in compliance, which is then a different conversation with the county than you're completely wrong, you're totally misusing your funds, then that's a totally different conversation. I'm thinking tonight our only conversation really is perhaps the boundaries and leaving the financial, as you say, until we get some feedback from all of the audits and are able to digest what is actually being suggested or how we have been operating according to the state's statutes.
Okay. Well, let's start then with that top issue, if you. Thank you. Okay. And I'll open for discussion, and
Well, I don't mind starting, but I think Harbor Point is probably an easy one to go with. I mean, it's a gated community with multi-million-dollar homes in it. I don't know, I mean, obviously I don't drive around back there because it's a gated community, but I think that might be an easy one to start with.
And that was going to be where I was starting as well. That's a gated area, so it's really easy to isolate that from the rest of the city or the community, if you will.
And actually, that's a gated area within
A gated area.
Right.
I mean, I don't even have access to get back in there, and I live behind the first gate.
They don't even allow me on the street, so I can't even speak to that.
And you have other areas that are still on the waterfront as you go down that aren't in the gated area that I still see that have some older homes that are either foreclosed on in the yards. So you still have, as you come to that, you have a little bit more in terms of blight. But once you get on through that fence to the other side, I think there's probably a valid point that some of those are not blighted back there.
I would agree with that, and like I said, that's an easy one to go with because there's a real designated line of where that area is.
Councilwoman Searle, do you?
I don't see how we're going to draw a line if we've got one blighted house in a nice area. I mean, is that going to take them out of that?
Well, what would happen?
Out of our assistance? CRA is what I'm asking.
Correct. What would happen if we withdrew the lines is they would recalculate, the amount of money coming in and what we pay in, and so on and so forth. And I think the argument wasn't that we're spending money in Harbor Point. That wasn't what Commissioner Moore was saying, because obviously we're not over, fixing yards over in Harbor Point with our CRA money. We're clearly not doing that. Commissioner Moore's point is well, you're drawing money from those houses for blight in other areas, and you should really not be drawing from those houses in Harbor Point because they're not blighted, and they shouldn't be paying into that because they have nothing to do with the rest of the blight in the rest of the city. And that was, I think, one of the points that he was making, or that's how I understood it when I was there. By that logic, he's suggesting it would be better just to take it out altogether because they're not paying in, they're not receiving any benefits, and they're just not really zoned within the city for CRA at all. And that was kind of his, I guess, suggestion, or what he thought we should talk about or consider.
Do we have some kind of description of what a blighted house or area looks like? I mean, I know what I've got in my mind, but what's going to fit the criteria for the commission?
Well, what was interesting, from what I can tell, looking into this issue, is originally when there was an application, there was a study that was done, and it was the recommendations on that study way back 20 years ago that they drew what they considered blighted the entire city. But I think the CRA has a specific statute that has a definition for blight, and I didn't know if our city attorney knows that off the top of his head. But I was going to that's more of a legal description, I think, for the definition of blight within this CRA statute.
That's what Google's for.
If you're looking for my response, I wish the world was that simple, Mr. Mayor.
Okay.
No, there's not.
Okay.
It says the word blight.
Okay.
To be facetious to you, but
I didn't know
it's
if
an
there-
issue, yeah, in other words.
I didn't know if there were any legal definitions that were captured. Okay.
There's,
Okay.
Well, that makes it a lot harder to draw the boundaries then if we don't know what the criteria for blight is. I mean, really, because you could think of the whole north side, north of the river, might not be considered blighted, but everything on the west side or the east side of 19 could be considered blighted. But I don't think all those homes are blighted, you know? I'm just saying, how are we going to do that
Well,
without a criteria?
I think you just have to look at the city. We know the city as well as anyone sitting up here, and we've dealt with issues throughout the city. And I think that we have to do the best we can with it.
I
So-
think that's the one area that's the easiest to deal with, because I've been back there with my ride-alongs with PD, and I don't think there's one property inside that gated community that's in any way, shape, or form considered
Oh, I
blighted.
agree with you 100%. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
just saying that end of Bay
Right.
Boulevard is just fine. I mean, they're happy and they're fine. I'm just saying, how are we going to draw it for the rest of the city? Because we've got the stuff that's east of 19, which there are pockets of really nice things, and there are pockets that aren't so nice.
Well,
And then we have industry back there. Is industry under the CRA? Commercial properties?
Well,
It falls under blighted communities, I believe.
Does it?
Yep.
Okay.
but I think one of the things the county would, I'm guessing, would be happy with is if we just address that one specific area and then readdressed it down the road if there's other areas that are coming up that aren't blighted.
So you're
So-
just going to narrow it down and say, let's drop Harbor Isles off the end and
And then
Harbor
reevaluate.
Point, Harbor Point.
Harbor Point.
Harbor Point.
And then we'll reevaluate after that, once the lines are
Well, that's
redrawn.
fairly easily done.
I think that's an
then.
easy one to do,
I
right?
mean, I don't think anybody's going to disagree with you on that.
But I think that's the safest bet, and I think, my humble opinion, that would be the direction for our.
It would show progress.
Sure.
So I have no objection to that.
And then the only other thing is procedurally how to do that, and I know that the city of Newport has recently done that, so we may have to reach out to them
Mr. Mayor, I
procedurally to see
could,
what's- Okay.
I actually had a discussion with that, with an expert this afternoon that does that. You have to amend your plan, okay, that has been filed. You're going to need to engage someone for somewhat of a study. There'll be public hearings, things along those nature, okay? Pretty much, I mean, relatively perfunctory as long as, you want to do it, but, and I would presume that once you engage your expert to do that study, I mean, can you hear me? Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, you're going to need to amend your plan, okay, from what I understand. You're going to need to engage someone to do somewhat of a study, okay, to analyze these. They're not just going to say, well, we know it's expensive homes. They'll look at that, and I presume that'd be relatively easy. You'll have public hearings, then you'll file it, and publications. So it's not like pressing a button and I'm going to come in here and it goes away in a day, okay? It's not a big deal. It can be done, what I understand.
Do we know if there's costs associated, which I'm sure there is, and how much that cost would be to?
That I don't know. I
Okay.
could get you that. Presume we could use CRA funds for that.
No, if we have to.
I'm not being facetious. I'm dead
Okay.
serious. You could use CRA funds for that, yeah.
Okay.
I would think it'd be in the, not hundreds of thousands, it'd be 10 or 20,000. I think it'd be a number like that.
Okay, so something manageable. All right.
At most, I can get you that answer though.
Okay. Well, this was put on for discussion. I don't know, is it possible to accept any motions at this point? So we can further our discussion or open it for any motions at this time as well.
I'd like to make a motion to analyze the costs associated with removing Harbor Point from the CRA.
Second.
Motion and a second. Before we go any further, is there anyone in the general public that wants to speak on this issue? Seeing no hands, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Mr. Mayor, just so I understand what you're voting on, analyze the costs. That's what you're doing? For Mr. Duke, we're going to analyze the costs.
Well, I think.
That was the motion.
Bring the cost,
Is
because
that
if it's a
all you-
$100,000 exercise, then,
No, I'm
Yeah,
asking, is that what
yeah.
you want to know, ballpark of the cost?
Correct.
Okay.
So is that going to be sufficient in terms of the motion and the?
Is it sufficient? It's whatever you want. I mean, we'll come back and try to get you an estimate of the
Okay.
cost. You know.
Okay. And then based on the cost,
Yeah, I mean, my expectation is at the next meeting, it'll be brought up as another topic on the agenda. We'll have the costs, and then we can vote to either proceed with the removal or reanalyze if it's some exorbitant sum of money.
right, but as long as it's cost effective,
Yeah.
then we'll vote at that point, okay?
I just don't want to go wading into a substantial exercise, in which case we have to say, hey, we're spending $100,000 to then now give back money too.
We're gonna spend $100,000 so we can get less money.
Yeah, exactly. It's conceptually, I have a
Yes.
hard time
But at the same
understanding
time,
that.
we could reach out to Newport Richie and see what avenues they went to help us along with this, correct?
I'll be having lunch with Debbie tomorrow. I'll ask her about that.
Yeah. I'm a,
I spoke on this in top people in the state that does it, and I suspect, and I wasn't being facetious before, that whatever it costs, you could take out of the CRA, okay, and but I don't think it'd be a lot. It's a relatively simple thing, you know. What the time frames, public hearings, things like that. But we'll come back. We'll get you some numbers.
And what I wanted to do is, the rest of the issues that kind of surround about the finances and how the money's being used, set that off until the audit comes out, and then we'll discuss it at
Yeah.
that point, once we get the audit.
yeah, I would really love, I think the county would probably love all the information as well from the audit, and
Yep.
that way we're all talking on about
The
a
same
same
page.
document.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah,
So with
Right.
that,
okay.
before we move on, I think that kind of closes most of the issues that were discussed. Is there anything further? Mr. Biles, if you don't mind, come on up.
No, I think globally, those are the two issues. Like I said, I think there's some other things we want to work on together as
I
partners.
thought it was just an opportune time
But
because you were
yes,
here.
But the two issues, that basically the boundary
Mm-hmm.
and then the finances, and we recognize that we're kind of waiting on an audit to kind of highlight some of the issues. I mean, we have our opinion on what the issues are, but having the audit actually probably validates what they think, the state thinks the
Sure.
issues are. And so we're fine to go forward in that manner. And I think I'm into the boundary, however you go about doing it. And I think the city, Newport Richie did do a study. I'm not sure if they hired somebody or if they did it internally, but they did do a study before they brought it back to the CRA, and then the CRA made a recommendation to the governing body, who then approved the amendment to the plan. So, yeah, no, and like I said, I think there's a lot of other projects we can work on that aren't necessarily directed to the CRA.
Right.
But, because there are some things we want to do here with y'all,
Well, we're.
and Newport Richie,
We're
right?
more than happy to
Right.
talk to you about it.
Yeah, we
So-
really want to sit down with everybody in a group, and it's, like we did with the business owners in the waterfront area.
Right.
We sat down, this will be our third workshop, and it's been great. Sitting down, getting feedback directly, that's what I'd like to do with the county, is all of us sit down
Right.
and review some of the things that we can work together on and things that it's not going to work.
And I think for now, on that respect, it's kind of hard to have combined meetings in today's environment. So it may be better just to have you give direction to your city manager, Newport Richie, and then the three of us can sit down and kind of work through those things and come to, kind of sketch something out for the governing bodies to kind of look at.
I'm fine
So,
with that.
Yeah.
Right, thank you.
No problem.
But it's nice to have you here
Yes.
for feedback too, direct feedback.
No, no,
Which
that's
is, it really helps us with our discussion and what we're doing here, so I really.
Like I said,
grateful you came
we're
up.
here to help. We want to get you on the right track. You know, we want the city to be successful, because we're successful when the cities are successful. And so we just want to, and there's other things we can work on to partner with over time as well. So, yeah, so,
Thank you for being here.
Yes, thank you very
Yes.
much.
Thank you.
no problem.
Thank you very much, Dan.
All right, thank you.
So with that will close item number 2, which was the discussion. We're going to move on to item 3, which is a presentation of the bid openings for dredging channels 1 and 26A. And I'm going to pass that to our city manager for introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There were 2 bids received and opened. They're both in your packet. And as you're information suggests, in no particular order, Grubbs Emergency Services bid was $816,000. The second bid came from Aetna Marine and Construction in the amount of $1,635,816. I did ask Dewberry Engineering to review both of those bids. They had no concerns with the bids. Obviously, I don't know the companies, and so I asked them, you know, are they legitimate companies doing legitimate business? Basically, are they capable of performing? Dewberry's assessment was, yes, they're both capable of performing. And as far as Dewberry was concerned, the bids were appropriate.
Did you ask him if we could have the $732,000 bid back?
No, sir.
Okay.
Quick question also, is Dewberry go through and make sure that we're getting apples for apples with these two quotes? I was going through them, and they are formatted a little bit differently, but is that something that they check, that we're getting all the services and the requirements?
Yes, they didn't come right out and say they compared line to line, but they did say that they reviewed both of the bids, and the bids were appropriate to what we had asked for.
For the job scope? Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
And with that, I think we'll open for discussion and/or motion.
Well, at this point, if nobody minds, I'll go ahead and start. I think at this point we need to get a dredge in the water. I think we need to look at moving forward on it. Our review of this cost us almost $100,000 on the second rebid. So I think we need to get started. I think the $816,000 bid, this is CRA funds that we'll be using for this. I think it's important that we start these projects before we lose any, permitting or different things like that, and that we get started.
Well, just to clarify, I think it's Restore Act, and then this is reimbursement.
Oh, it's
from our CRA.
reimbursement, that's correct.
If I'm not mistaken.
No, it is. You're correct.
And I remember the original meeting, and there was a heated conversation and debate, and I know that, I think it was Mr. McClary, one of his issues is that we didn't have enough bids, and the one that we had was the 732. And I remember that was one of the issues that came up then. We're kind of in the same posture now as we were then. You only really have one kind of legitimate bid in terms of that would be in the wheelhouse of what we could actually afford to do. That having been said, I was of the opinion back then that we should put dredgers in the water and get it moving at the 732. I'm of the opinion now that I just don't think it's going to get any better. So my suggestion was to approve the 816. If not approve the 816, the other option would be to contact Dewberry to see whether or not they would honor that original bid. I know it was rejected by us back then, but having Dewberry do it at a lesser cost, if we could have that bid back, would be really what I would want to do. I was always in favor of that original bid, and I liked that bid at the time. And I still think that would be the direction to go if we could do it. If not, I think the vice mayor's right that we have to get things moving and take the 816 bid.
Well, I know we had the original bid of 7032 several months ago. It did exclude the permitted disposal of the material, which was another $100,000. So it was actually 832 compared to on the last bid, once you put in our permitting costs and everything that the bidder excluded. So really, we actually did get a better number, assuming that the permitting disposal of this is included in the bid, which I can't see at this point, whether it's included or excluded.
Hence my question on whether Dewberry reviewed.
Yeah, so I'm having a hard time kind of looking at this in that, do we have a complete bid? I know we caught it on the last bid where they put it in the fine print almost that it was excluded for permitting costs and estimated at $50 per yard. Do we have that same issue with this bid?
Well, I wanted to correct, because I remember the original bid not only included emptying it out now, because right now there's spoils in our site. So the original 732, if I recall correctly, was to empty that out, dredge both canals, and then re-empty it out, which would leave us with both canals dredged and then 2 loads of spoils removed from the site. So that was the original bid. for
Minus the
730
disposal costs, yes.
Including the disposal
No.
costs. That, if I recall, that was everything.
We were setting aside another $100,000. That's why one of the discussions we were having, it was an incomplete bid originally. Because the city had to set aside monies, they had excluded it in the original bid. I remember going through this whole thing, and I said, well, we don't have a complete cost.
So the 816, I guess the question, what happened with Dewberry doesn't matter as much, as long as, does the 816 include both disposal sites? Now and then?
Yeah, I mean, is this 816 a complete out-the-door number is my question, not, oh, well, I didn't have permitted disposal or I didn't have XYZ. Do we have a complete cost here? Is my question.
If I could, I think on page 14, you might see the answers in the Grubbs bid. It does list hauling and disposal of existing spoil material at a unit price of 8, hauling and disposal of phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. Worth noting that those $8 and $10 unit prices, it's been pointed out to me that's a fraction of what the actual tipping fees would be locally, so unless they have some other option.
And that was the problem we had on the last bid, is it included, this is essentially a transportation fee, more or less, not the tipping fee. So who's responsible for the tipping fee?
I'm sorry, I don't have that.
I'm not necessarily looking at you, I'm looking in your general direction. My problem is, until I know that we have a complete bid, I don't want to say yes and put the city into an award where they have an incomplete scope or not a correct identification of the cost.
Well, it says hauling and disposal on page 14. Hauling,
At $10 a square foot. The last time we went through this, it was costs of $50 a cubic yard, or I'm sorry, at $10 a cubic yard. The last time we were talking about this, it was $50 a cubic yard. So where did we save $40 a cubic yard? If the bidder is willing to say, yes, you don't have to worry about it for $10 a cubic yard, I'm okay with that.
well, no, he's saying he's disposing of it, from what I can tell here.
Yeah, it's in his costs.
Right, it's in his costs.
Okay.
The hauling and disposal of 70,000. Phase 1, phase 2, and a grand total of 816.
But if we do that, we have to make sure in our contract with this particular company that's spelled out very specifically in the contract, because what I don't want to happen is the contractor to come back and say, well, we need additional monies for disposal.
Well, the other thing we need to check is that, I think at the time also it required a certain Class 8 disposal site.
It still does, I think.
Well, want to make sure that they're not quoting us a Class 8 disposal site. It could be a different fee as well.
Right, but if they're bearing the responsibility of the spoils and disposing of the spoils and transportation of the spoils, that's kind of a non-issue to us. We're just looking at the total price.
Mm-hmm.
Do the bid documents say bidder is responsible for all permitted disposal permits?
I get a question. On page 1 of 6, or 10 in the thing, it says, in compliance with your advertisement for bids, bidder hereby proposes to perform all work for the construction of Port Ritchie Channel 1 and 26A dredging for removal, hauling, and disposal to an approved Class 1 landfill of the existing and new dredge spoiled material in the DMM site in strict accordance with the contract documents.
Correct. And then it says that further in the document, it says for hauling, disposal.
So that, where's the loophole that says that it's not complete?
I didn't say there was a loophole.
No, I'm just asking. I'm really seriously asking. I really want to know if there's
That actually is
a
the
hole
answer to the
somewhere.
question. That is the answer.
So
to
it's
the question.
816, and that includes
Hauling and disposal.
Hauling and disposal.
A Class 1 site.
And not of what they dredge, but what's in the.
Already
Yeah, it's of
existing.
both. It says it here.
Yep.
on the supporting
Okay,
existing.
so we've got a complete bid? Is that what you're looking for?
That's what
Mr. McClary?
the engineer has told us, so yes, we have a complete bid.
We have a
Per the
complete bid.
engineer.
Okay. Question answered?
Yep.
So, but going back, I thought we had a complete bid back with Dewberry for the 732. The question is whether or not we try and reach out back to them to see if they're still interested at that price, or if we just go with the 816 and move on since that's before us.
Well,
Was
can
Dewberry's
you,
complete?
Mr. Attorney, can you go back to an existing bidder after a bid has been sealed and then ask them?
I was afraid you'd ask me that. It's not passing the smell test to me, but I have to do some research on that. You know, I think I'd have some problems with that. I'd have to do some research.
Because it went back out to open bid and they did not bid.
They didn't bid this
The
time.
second
No,
time.
They had an
my
opportunity.
point
Right.
is, you know, someone solicited a bid here, and we're gonna use their solicited bid to negotiate someone from a previous bid is something I'd have
Yeah.
to do some research on, but that's
I-
just not passing the
So,
smell test.
it's not possible to revive.
Because you would do a second bid on everything then, right? Wouldn't we just do
No.
that all the time, right?
No.
You get do two bids and everything, reject it the first time, then go out to bid again, see if you can get something lower and negotiate the first bid again, right? Wouldn't that be a great way to do things? Just not passing the smell test.
I am
to me.
familiar with some case law where you actually wind up getting to pay the same contract twice for something like that.
I'd have to check it, but it's just not passing the logic test. And I'm gonna tell you, if you could do that, just go out to bid twice on everything. You know, we reject it, see if you can go out to bid again, get a lower figure, and come in to renegotiate the first bid.
Well, this is our second one, so we're either going to accept
Well,
this or go on.
I think at this point, we need to actually step up, move forward, and get this ball rolling. If we go around this one more time, my suspicions are that we're going to get increased higher bids, because right now the price of materials and everything, fuel, are all going up.
Exactly.
And I fear that if we don't lock this in now, and we do anything, again, it's going to come back, and it's going to come back higher again.
The other issue is the 732 was within the 60 that we were getting from Restore Act. It was within
660.
it was within the pool of money that we had to work with. The 816 is not within that pool of money we have to work with. And I know that we were putting $200,000 towards lighting and other improvements in the waterfront. So the other issue coming up is if the 760, which is a reimbursable, does not cover the 816, because obviously the 816 is higher, I think we have to address that money that we set aside for the 200,000 improvements, we have to cut into that for the 816 bid. Is that kind of the direction we're going here?
I don't think so. Could we go into the CRA fund then for the balance of that?
Yes.
I'm not sure I understand. I think someone's missing a bigger
Yeah, I
picture
think so
here,
too.
okay? We're at a CRA meeting here.
Right.
The CRA is gonna be putting out the money for this, okay? If we didn't get reimbursed, since we had an issue with that before, okay, CRA is gonna spend that money for, and I'm talking the 666, the 2/3.
Okay.
If we do get reimbursed, that money would come back to the CRA, not to the city, okay? I don't wanna make that clear, we're being audited, and I'm being asked these questions, okay? It would come here. So yes, Mayor, if it's less than the 666 or whatever, we're gonna be reimbursed, whatever that 2/3 number is, would be additional monies the CRA
That
would
we
be
have in the
spending.
Back into the CRA.
But yeah, keep
Right.
in mind, we have $1 million in it just from this year, and you're getting 666 back, and
Back.
you've obligated 200,000, you're down to 800, so you'd have to take it out of the 800,000 you have now.
Okay.
We're covered.
We're covered.
You got that right.
So I just wanted to make sure. So
One more point of clarity, I'm sorry. This contract would be contingent upon approval by the Restore Act and everything else, or is this independent of that?
Everything we do gets approved by Treasury, yes.
So theoretically, even though we approve this contract today, this contract essentially, or this dredge contract goes to Treasury as well for final approval?
That's correct, and every single step we take, the notice of commencement and everything else would go to Treasury, and you never know if you're gonna get paid. We went down 5 years for that, right? The very 11th hour. Okay. So we may get reimbursed, we may not.
Okay.
But the short answer to your question is yes, every comment, everything.
Mr. Kinsella, we haven't heard from you. I wanted to hear your opinion or hear you weigh in on this particular issue.
I feel we need to keep moving forward with this.
Okay. So at this time, we're looking for a motion and or further discussion.
Are we looking for a motion to approve the contract?
That would be,
Is that what we're, because I know it was for discussion and it wasn't on as like an agenda
Yeah,
item.
you want a motion to approve the Grubbs contract, yes. And if
Okay.
you want to put a proviso in there that Mr., not to put any work on Mr. Dude here, but you want him to triple check that it's covering the tipping fees, yeah, he could do that, you know. Yeah, you want a motion to approve, accept the bid, I guess, on the Grubbs contract.
Well, I'd like to make the motion then to accept the bid for Grubbs Engineering, and I'll also have staff go through and make sure we are covering our extra fine tooth comb there with that.
I second it.
before we vote, I see members from the general public here. Anyone want to comment? Come on up.
Dave Mueller, 5439 Blue Point Drive. At one point in time, Pasco County was looking to do a lot of dredging, and they have a lot of waterfront projects in the works already. And it would behoove us to try to partner with them to try to leverage the spend so that you don't have all those mobilization costs repeated over and over again. With Pasco and our efforts, is there a better way to spend that money that would effectively address better bang for our buck, make our funds go further, and maybe accomplish more? I would like you to give consideration to that. Thank you.
Any other comments before we come back to council? Seeing no hands, any other discussion before we vote? Hearing none, put it to a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion passes. And I believe that concludes our board business. We're going to move on to old business. And I'm going to start with Mr. Kinsella this time on the other side. Any old business?
None.
Mr. McClary?
I have none, thank you.
Councilwoman Searle?
I'm fine, thank you.
None?
No CRA, no.
With that, looking for a motion.
Motion adjourned.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, we got.
Huh? Oh.